Have you ever walked into a room and felt instantly judged? Noticed the subtle glances, the whispers behind cupped hands, the assumptions made based solely on the clothes you wear, or the perceived weariness etched onto your face? We live in a world quick to categorize, often mistaking humble appearances for a lack of worth. But what if the person dismissed most easily held the deepest connection, a secret that could shatter the very foundations of that judgment? Imagine a working woman, whose hands bear the marks of honest labor, facing scorn in a place built on the very idea of compassion. What happens when the truth about her identity flips the script entirely? This is the story of such a woman, a testament to the fact that dignity isn't woven into expensive fabrics, but into the strength of character, often hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for its moment to shine. Maria Rodriguez Vance felt the familiar ache settle deep in her lower back as she straightened up, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of her worn but clean hand. The ornate lobby of the Starlight Tower condominium sparkled under the recessed lighting, its polished marble floors reflecting the city lights bleeding in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She'd just finished Mrs. Albright's penthouse apartment on the 58th floor, a weekly job she'd held for nearly 7 years. Mrs. Albright, frail and often forgetful but always kind, relied on Maria not just for cleaning, but for small errands and reminders. Tonight had run later than usual. Mrs. Albright was attending the prestigious Starlight Charity Gala, being held just across the street in the Grand Astoria Ballroom, a major event hosted by one of the city's most celebrated young philanthropists. Just as Maria was packing her supplies, Mrs. Albright had panicked, realizing she'd left her essential heart medication behind on her nightstand. Too flustered and already running late for her car service, she'd pleaded with Maria. "Oh, Maria, dear, could you possibly? It's just across the street. They'll let you leave it at the coat check. I'd be ever so grateful." Maria, despite her fatigue and the late hour, couldn't refuse. Worry creased her brow. Mrs. Albright needed that medication. So, armed with the small, clearly labeled bottle in a paper pharmacy bag, Maria had promised to run it over immediately. She hadn't had time to change out of her practical navy slacks and pale blue tunic top, her work attire, nor did she think it would matter for a quick drop-off at the entrance. Now standing outside the gleaming brass doors of the Grand Astoria, the thumping bass of music and the bright cascade of laughter spilling out onto the sidewalk made her hesitate. This wasn't just any event, it was the event of the season, hosted by Leo Vance, the tech mogul turned billionaire philanthropist whose face seemed to be everywhere lately, magazines, news segments, even bus ads. He was known for his sharp mind, his surprisingly down-to-earth demeanor despite his immense wealth, and his commitment to various social causes. Maria felt a familiar pang of quiet pride whenever she saw his name, a pride carefully concealed beneath layers of maternal worry and the necessary discretion their vastly different lives demanded. She clutched the small paper bag tighter and pushed through the heavy door, stepping into a world utterly alien to her own. The transition was jarring. Outside, the cool November air and the muted sounds of New York City traffic. Inside, a wave of warmth, expensive perfume, and the high-pitched buzz of hundreds of conversations hit her like a physical force. Diamonds glittered on necks and wrists, silks and satins shimmered under the colossal crystal chandeliers, and impeccably dressed guests navigated the crowded foyer with an air of effortless belonging. Maria felt immediately out of place, her simple clothes marking her as an anomaly, a smudge on a pristine canvas. She scanned the opulent space, searching for a sign indicating the coat check, wanting to complete her errand and retreat back to the quiet anonymity of her subway ride home to Queens. She spotted a discreet sign pointing down a short corridor and began to make her way through the throng, murmuring polite, "Excuse me," that were mostly ignored. As she navigated past a cluster of women in jewel-toned gowns, she overheard a snippet of conversation. "Simply dreadful, Agnes. Can you imagine wearing synthetics to the Starlight Gala?" one woman drawled, casting a dismissive glance towards Maria without truly seeing her. Maria's cheeks flushed, but she kept her gaze fixed on her destination. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to help Mrs. Albright. She finally reached the less crowded corridor leading to the coat check, relief washing over her. But just as she approached the counter, a sharp voice cut through the relative quiet. "And just where do you think you're going?" Maria turned. Standing before her were two women, their expressions a mixture of disdain and suspicion. One, dripping in emeralds and clutching a champagne flute like a weapon, was Beatrice Worthington, a notorious socialite whose photograph often appeared in the society pages, usually accompanied by scathing commentary. The other, slightly younger with sharp features and an equally expensive, albeit more modern dress, was her apparent companion, Cynthia Davies. Beatrice's eyes raked over Maria's attire, from her sensible, slightly scuffed walking shoes to her plain tunic, lingering on the faded fabric. "This is a private event, madam. Clearly you've made a mistake." Maria held up the small paper bag. "I'm just dropping this off for Mrs. Albright," she explained calmly, her voice steady despite the sudden knot in her stomach. "She's a guest here. It's her medication." "I was just going to leave it at the coat check." Cynthia scoffed, a small unpleasant sound. "Mrs. Albright, how convenient. And I suppose she sent you?" She exchanged a look with Beatrice, heavy with insinuation. "Security!" Beatrice called out, her voice rising imperiously, drawing the attention of nearby guests and a uniformed security guard who hurried over. "Frank, remove this person. She's clearly trying to crash the party. Probably looking for handouts." The guard, Frank, a burly man whose face was etched with weariness, looked from the imposing socialites to Maria, his expression hardening into professional neutrality, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. Maria felt a surge of indignation. "I am not trying to crash anything," she stated firmly, her quiet dignity asserting itself. "I work for Mrs. Albright. She forgot this, and I'm delivering it." She held out the bag more insistently. "Please, just let me leave it." Beatrice waved a dismissive hand adorned with rings that probably cost more than Maria earned in a year. "Nonsense. People like her always have a story. She probably picked that name out of thin air. Look at her clothes. She likely wandered in off the street hoping for scraps." The word scraps hung in the air, sharp and cruel. Humiliation burned Maria's face, hot and stinging. Guests nearby were now openly staring, some whispering, others looking away in discomfort, but none intervening. She was being judged, condemned, and dismissed based entirely on her appearance, on the fact that she looked like what she was, a working woman, tired after a long day. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me," Frank said, his voice gruff, taking a step towards her. He avoided her eyes. "There's no need for a scene. Just come quietly." "But Mrs. Albright needs this," Maria pleaded, her voice trembling slightly now, not with fear, but with the sheer injustice of it all. "It's important." "That's enough," Beatrice snapped. "Frank, do your job. We can't have vagrants disrupting Mr. Vance's important evening." The mention of the host's name seemed to solidify Frank's resolve. He reached out, his hand hovering near Maria's arm. "Let's go, ma'am, now." He wasn't rough, but his intention was clear. He was going to escort her out, treat her like an intruder, a nuisance to be disposed of. Maria looked at the disdainful faces of Beatrice and Cynthia, at the curious or indifferent stares of the other guests, at the guard preparing to physically remove her. The weight of their collective judgment felt crushing. All her years of hard work, of maintaining her dignity despite countless small slights and assumptions, seemed to culminate in this moment of public degradation. She felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. With a deep breath, steeling herself, she allowed Frank to gently guide her back towards the main entrance, the path clearing before them as guests stepped aside, their eyes following her progress. The whispers seemed louder now, laced with smug satisfaction and pity. She was being ejected from the glittering party, a nobody who dared to tread where she didn't belong. The cold night air hit her as Frank opened the door, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. "Sorry, ma'am," he mumbled, his gaze still averted, before shutting the door firmly behind her. Leaving her alone on the sidewalk, the sounds of the gala muffled once more, the small paper bag still clutched tightly in her hand. The subway ride back to Queens felt longer than usual. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels against the tracks seemed to echo the hammering in Maria's chest. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a harsh glare, illuminating the diverse faces of the late-night commuters. Tired workers, students, people heading home after a night out, none aware of the sting of humiliation she carried within her. She sank onto a worn plastic seat, the paper bag containing Mrs. Albright's medication resting on her lap like a heavy weight. What would Mrs. Albright do without it? Maria felt a pang of guilt, quickly followed by renewed anger. It wasn't her fault. She had tried. She replayed the scene in her mind. Beatrice Worthington's sneer, Cynthia Davies' scoff, the guard's reluctant duty, the silent judgment of the crowd. People like her. Vagrant. Scraps. The words circled, venomous and sharp. Had her son, her Leo, ever encountered people like that? People who judged so swiftly, so cruelly, based on nothing but surface appearances? She knew he moved in circles vastly different from her own, worlds populated by the wealthy and powerful. Did they treat him differently behind his back, whispering about his humble beginnings? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She had raised Leo on her own after her husband, Carlos, died suddenly from a heart attack when Leo was just 10. They had little money, living in a cramped apartment, Maria juggling multiple cleaning jobs to make ends meet. She remembered the exhaustion, the constant worry about bills, the sacrifices made to ensure Leo had school supplies, decent clothes, a chance at a better future. She remembered his fierce intelligence, his insatiable curiosity, the way he'd tinker with old electronics salvaged from the curb, his eyes shining with determination. She'd pushed him, encouraged him, celebrated every small victory, shielding him as much as possible from the harsh realities of their poverty while instilling in him the values of hard work, honesty, and compassion. Values learned from her own parents, immigrants who had scrubbed floors and washed dishes to give her a foothold in this country. And Leo had soared. His brilliance took him to scholarships, then to Stanford, then to the dizzying heights of the tech world. He'd built an empire from an idea sketched on a napkin, and now, still so young, he was Leo Vance, the billionaire philanthropist hosting tonight's glittering gala. He'd begged her, countless times, to stop working. "Mom, please," he'd say, his voice earnest over the phone. "You don't have to do this anymore. Let me take care of you. Buy you a nice house, anything you want." But Maria always gently refused. Cleaning wasn't just a job. It was her routine, her independence. It kept her grounded, connected to the life she knew. She didn't want to rattle around a big empty house. Her small tidy apartment in Queens, filled with photos of Leo and Carlos, felt like home. Besides, accepting too much felt wrong. She was proud of her son, fiercely proud, but she was also her own person. She didn't want to be simply the billionaire's mother. She was Maria Rodriguez Vance, a woman who earned her own keep. She hadn't told Leo the full extent of the condescension she sometimes faced, the subtle dismissals, or the occasional outright rudeness from clients or their guests. She didn't want to worry him, or perhaps make him feel ashamed of her simple life. Tonight's incident, however, felt different. It was more public, more personal, more cutting. As the train pulled into her station, she felt a profound weariness, deeper than just physical fatigue. Back in her apartment, the familiar scent of Fabuloso and arroz con gandules hung faintly in the air. She placed the pharmacy bag on her small kitchen table, her heart still heavy about Mrs. Albright. She should call the Starlight Towers front desk, explain what happened, ask them to send someone up to the penthouse to retrieve the medication from her cleaning cart where she'd left her spare key. As she reached for the phone, it rang, startling her. It was Leo. "Mom? Hey, how are you?" His voice was bright, energetic, despite the late hour and the demands of hosting a major event. "Leo, mijo, everything okay?" she asked, forcing cheerfulness into her own voice. "Everything's great. The gala is a huge success. We've already exceeded our fundraising goal. Just wanted to check in. You sound a little tired." "Oh, just a long day, you know," she hedged. Mrs. Albright's place took a bit longer. Should she tell him? Spoil his successful night with her unpleasant encounter? Make him angry or upset on her behalf? No. It was her burden to bear. Well, get some rest, Mom. I wish you could have been here, you know. Maybe next year? Maybe, mijo. I'm very proud of you, she said, the words catching in her throat. Love you, Mom. Love you too, Leo. She hung up, the lie of omission settling uneasily within her. She looked at the photo on the mantelpiece, a smiling Leo, arms slung around her shoulders, taken last Christmas. He looked so happy, so confident. He deserved his success. She wouldn't tarnish it with the ugliness she'd experienced. She made the call to the Starlight Tower security, explaining about the medication, omitting the details of her attempted delivery at the gala. They promised to handle it. Relief eased some of her tension, but the sting of the humiliation remained, a cold knot in her stomach. She changed into her nightgown, the simple cotton soft against her skin, a stark contrast to the imagined silks and satins of the gala. As she drifted off to sleep, the faces of Beatrice and Cynthia floated in her mind, their lips curled in scorn. People like her. The next morning, Maria woke with the residue of the previous night's encounter clinging to her like a shroud. The sky outside her window was a dull, unforgiving grey. She went through her usual routine, coffee, a quick check of the news on her small kitchen television, tidying up. But her movements felt heavy, lethargic. The image of being ushered out of the Grand Astoria played repeatedly in her head. She had another job scheduled for the afternoon, cleaning a large house in a nearby suburb. But the thought of facing another potentially judgmental environment filled her with an unusual sense of dread. Around lunchtime, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. "Big surprise profile piece on me just dropped online. Check it out, love you." Maria smiled faintly. Leo always downplayed his media attention, but she knew he secretly liked sharing it with her. She tapped the link he sent, opening a major online news magazine article titled "Leo Vance, the Billionaire with a Purpose, an inside look at the man-changing philanthropy." The article was glowing, detailing his innovative tech background, his pivot to charitable work, his vision for the foundation bearing his name. It mentioned the success of last night's Starlight Gala, quoting prominent attendees praising his leadership and generosity. Then, scrolling down, Maria froze. There was a section titled Roots and Values, and prominently featured was a photograph she hadn't seen published before. It was an older picture, taken maybe 15 years ago, outside their old apartment building. A much younger Leo, lanky and grinning, stood beside her. Maria looked tired even then, her work clothes practical, her hair pulled back simply, but she was smiling, her arm around her son's waist, pride evident in her eyes, despite the lines of fatigue. The caption read, "Leo Vance with his mother, Maria Rodriguez Vance." Vance credits his mother, a longtime cleaner and housekeeper, for instilling the values of hard work and empathy that drive his philanthropic efforts. "My mother is the strongest, most dignified person I know," Vance told us. "She taught me that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by integrity and how you treat others. Everything I am, I owe to her sacrifices and her example." Maria read the words again, tears welling up, blurring the screen. This time, they weren't tears of humiliation, but of overwhelming love and pride. Her son, her brilliant, successful Leo, wasn't ashamed. He was proud. He saw her, truly saw her, and acknowledged her contribution to his life on a public stage. The article continued, quoting Leo further about respecting all kinds of labor and remembering one's origins. It was a powerful statement, woven into the narrative of his success. A warmth spread through Maria's chest, chasing away the chill of the previous night. Her son hadn't forgotten. He hadn't changed. Just then, another call came through. It was Mrs. Albright. "Maria, dear, oh, thank goodness I reached you," she sounded flustered. "There was some confusion about my medication last night. The security here told me you tried to drop it off at the gala. But then, well, apparently there was some unpleasantness." Maria's heart sank slightly. "Yes, Mrs. Albright, there was a misunderstanding at the door." "Misunderstanding?" "Beatrice Worthington called me this morning, sounding rather shaken, trying to apologize profusely about some dreadful mistake involving you. She and Cynthia Davies apparently mistook you for, well, Never mind what they thought. She said Leo Vance himself intervened. Your son, Maria? Leo Vance is your son? Mrs. Albright sounded utterly astounded. Maria hesitated. She'd kept her connection to Leo quiet, preferring her anonymity, but the article was out there now. Yes, Mrs. Albright, Leo is my son. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by an exclamation. Good heavens, Maria, why didn't you ever say? That explains everything. Beatrice was practically groveling. Apparently Leo gave her and Cynthia quite the dressing down right there in the foyer. Said something about his mother being worth more than everyone in that room combined. It's all over the gossip columns this morning. Maria felt a dizzying mix of shock and vindication. Leo had found out. He had defended her. How? She hadn't told him. He was there? Apparently so. Came upon the scene just as they were sending you away, Beatrice said. Recognized you immediately. Oh, Maria, I am so terribly sorry you went through that. Those women can be dreadful snobs. Suddenly Maria understood. Leo must have seen her being escorted out. He must have recognized her, put two and two together. The thought of him confronting those women, defending her honor in front of everyone, filled her with a fierce, protective love. Her quiet, hard-working son, now a powerful man, had stood up for his mother. The full weight of his actions, his public declaration in the article, his immediate defense at the gala, it washed over her. The humiliation she'd felt seemed to shrink, overshadowed by the immense pride and gratitude swelling in her heart. She wasn't just a cleaner they could dismiss. She was Maria Rodriguez Vance, mother to Leo Vance, a woman whose strength and dignity had shaped a man admired by millions. The phone call ended with Mrs. Albright offering profuse apologies and promising to give Beatrice Worthington an earful herself. Maria sat quietly for a moment, processing everything. The grey morning suddenly seemed brighter. The weight had lifted. She looked again at the picture in the article, at her younger self standing proudly beside her son. Yes, she was a working woman, and yes, she was proud of it, and her son was proud of her too. That was all that mattered. Later that day, as Maria prepared to leave for her afternoon job, feeling lighter than she had in months, her phone rang again. It was Leo. "Mom," he said, his voice softer now, laced with concern. "I read about what happened last night. I saw the gossip sites. Mrs. Albright called me too. Why didn't you tell me?" Maria took a deep breath. "I didn't want to spoil your night, mijo. And I suppose I was embarrassed." "Embarrassed? Mom, they should be embarrassed. How dare they treat you like that?" His anger was palpable, protective. "I saw you as they were making you leave. I recognized your back, the way you hold your shoulders. I knew it was you. I dealt with it." "I know, Leo. Mrs. Albright told me, and I saw the article. Thank you, mijo. It meant everything." "They needed to know, Mom. Everyone needs to know where I come from, who taught me what matters," he said firmly. "No one ever gets to disrespect you like that again. No one." There was a pause, then he added gently, "Are you sure you don't want to finally retire?" "Please?" Maria smiled. "Let's talk about it, Leo. Let's talk." Maybe, just maybe, it was time. Not because she was ashamed of her work, but because she deserved the rest, and her son deserved the peace of mind. The world might still judge by appearances, but she knew her worth, and more importantly, her son knew it too. The humiliation had stung, but the love and vindication that followed were a balm, healing the wound and leaving behind a quiet strength. This story teaches us the profound error of judging individuals by their clothing or occupation. A working woman's true value lies not in her outward appearance or social standing, but in her resilience, her integrity, and the quiet dignity she carries. Prejudice may inflict momentary pain, but it cannot diminish inherent worth. Ultimately, character, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family are the true measures of wealth, capable of silencing the harshest critics and revealing the extraordinary strength often hidden in perceived ordinary lives. Respect for all honest work is paramount. Have you ever noticed how quickly we judge people based on the label on their clothes rather than the strength in their hands? We live in a world dazzled by surface glitter, often overlooking the quiet brilliance hidden beneath a simple exterior. Imagine a working woman, skilled and dedicated, entering a realm of high fashion only to be met with scorn because her appearance doesn't match the price tags. What if her hands, calloused from years of honest labor, held the very blueprint to the world that mocked her? What secrets might lie behind a pair of unassuming eyes, and what happens when those secrets are forced into the light? This is the story of such a woman, whose quiet dignity was challenged, whose craft was dismissed, but whose true identity held the power to unravel everything they thought they knew. Prepare to question what value truly means. Ilara Vance felt the familiar ache in her lower back as she carefully lifted the garment bag. It was heavier than usual, not just in weight, but in significance. Inside lay a bespoke evening gown, a piece commissioned by Aura, the monolithic fashion house whose flagship boutique stood like a gleaming minimalist temple on Chicago's Magnificent Mile. She wasn't delivering a new creation, she was returning a repaired one. A task requiring the kind of intricate, almost invisible mending that few possess the skill or patience for anymore. Ilara, in her late 50s, with silver threads starting to weave through her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, possessed both in abundance. Her own clothes were practical, durable. A neatly pressed but faded cotton blouse, sturdy dark trousers, comfortable walking shoes that had seen better days. They were the uniform of a life spent working, not showcasing. As she approached the imposing glass doors of the Aura boutique, she took a deep breath, steeling herself. This world, Aura's world, was not hers. She merely serviced its fringes, a ghost in its glittering machine. The doors hissed open, admitting her into a space that felt less like a store and more like a modern art gallery. Stark white walls soared towards recessed lighting that cast cool, unforgiving glows on mannequins draped in fabrics that shimmered like liquid metal. The air hummed with a low electronic beat and smelled faintly of expensive perfume and leather. Two figures stood near the front, presiding over the entrance like impossibly chic sentinels. Bianca, sharp-featured with razor-cut blonde hair and an asymmetric black dress that probably cost more than Ilara's monthly rent, looked Ilara up and down with an expression hovering between boredom and distaste. Liam, beside her, all sharp angles and studied nonchalance in skinny jeans and a silk shirt, mirrored the sentiment, adjusting his perfectly coiffed hair. They were young, radiating the effortless, slightly cruel confidence of those who dwell entirely within the bubble of high fashion. "Can I help you?" Bianca's voice was smooth but carried an edge, the question less an offer of assistance and more a challenge to Ilara's presence. Her eyes flickered over Ilara's sensible shoes, lingering perhaps a fraction too long. "Yes," Ilara said, her voice calm and even though her stomach tightened. "I have a delivery, a repair for Miss Sterling." She held up the garment bag, careful not to let it brush against anything. Liam let out a small, almost inaudible scoff. "A delivery? Through the front? Don't you know where the service entrance is?" He gestured vaguely towards the back with a flick of his wrist, adorned with several silver bracelets that jangled softly. "Miss Sterling specifically requested I bring it directly," Ilara replied, keeping her gaze steady. Anya Sterling, the boutique's manager, was exacting, demanding, but occasionally recognized the need for discretion and direct handover when dealing with valuable or problematic pieces. This gown, rumored to be for a very high-profile client, was both. Bianca exchanged a look with Liam, a silent communication that spoke volumes of shared superiority. "Right," she drawled, tapping impatiently on a tablet she held. "And you are?" "Ilara Vance, the seamstress." She hated the way the title sounded in this environment, small, archaic, irrelevant. "Ah, the seamstress," Bianca repeated, emphasizing the word as if it were an amusing specimen under a microscope. "The one who still uses, what was it Anya said? Needles and thread?" She smirked at Liam, who chuckled. Seriously, like actual sewing? Liam added, feigning astonishment. I thought that went out with like butter churns. Ilara felt a familiar heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered this attitude. In a world obsessed with rapid trends, disposable fashion, and digital design, her meticulous handcraft was often seen as a relic. Some things require a traditional touch, she said quietly, refusing to be drawn into an argument, especially with delicate fabrics and intricate beadwork like this. Whatever, Bianca waved a dismissive hand. Just wait over there. She pointed towards a stark white bench near the entrance, deliberately positioned away from the main displays. And try not to touch anything. Mrs. Sterling is busy. Ilara nodded curtly and moved to the bench, placing the garment bag carefully beside her. She sat, her back straight, hands folded in her lap, a picture of quiet patience that belied the simmering frustration inside. She watched Bianca and Liam glide around the store, adjusting displays, whispering to each other with knowing glances in her direction. They attended to a wealthy-looking woman dripping in jewelry with effusive compliments, their voices shifting into tones of practiced adoration. The contrast was stark, painful. Here, value was measured solely by appearance, by the ability to afford the Aura label. Her skill, her years of dedication, the artistry in her fingers, none of it registered. She was invisible, or worse, an object of mild amusement, an anachronism cluttering their pristine space. Minutes stretched into nearly half an hour. Ilara could see Ms. Sterling through the glass partition of her office at the back, talking animatedly on the phone. She wasn't that busy. This was a deliberate slight, a petty power play to reinforce Ilara's perceived insignificance. Finally, Ms. Sterling emerged, a woman in her 40s with severe dark hair cut into a sharp bob, wearing a tailored Aura pantsuit that radiated authority. Her expression was perpetually strained, her eyes sharp and assessing. She barely glanced at Ilara as she approached Bianca and Liam. "Is this it?" Mrs. Sterling asked, gesturing towards Ilara without looking directly at her. "Yes, Anya," Bianca said, her voice regaining its professional veneer. "Could delivery arrived?" Ms. Sterling finally turned her attention to Ilara, her gaze sweeping over her with the same dismissive appraisal as her staff. "You took your time getting here," she snapped, though Ilara had arrived precisely at the agreed-upon time. "I apologize if there was any misunderstanding about the timing, Ms. Sterling," Ilara said evenly. "I arrived at 10, as requested." Ms. Sterling waved it away impatiently. Fine, let me see the work." She gestured for Ilara to bring the garment bag over to a large white counter. Liam smirked again as Ilara carefully carried it over. Ms. Sterling unzipped the bag with brisk, efficient movements, revealing the gown inside. A cascade of midnight blue silk chiffon embroidered with thousands of tiny iridescent beads. There had been a tear near the hem, snagged during a fitting nearly invisible but catastrophic on a garment of this caliber. Ms. Sterling held the repaired section up to the harsh light, scrutinizing it intensely. Bianca and Liam leaned in, their expressions conveying exaggerated doubt. "Well?" Ms. Sterling demanded, still examining the fabric. "The repair is structurally sound and virtually invisible," Ilara stated calmly. "I re-wove the damaged threads using the original warp and weft technique and secured the beadwork from behind with—" "Spare me the technical lecture, please," Ms. Sterling interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension. "I don't need a sewing lesson." She finally lowered the gown, her expression unreadable but clearly unimpressed. "It's adequate, I suppose." "Adequate?" Ilara felt a surge of indignation. The repair was flawless, a testament to hours of painstaking work under magnification. It required a level of skill that likely no one else in the city possessed. Bianca leaned closer, peering at the mend. I don't know, Anya," she said, adopting a concerned tone. "It looks a little bunchy. Maybe? Right here?" She pointed vaguely near the repair site. Liam chimed in. "Yeah, and is the thread exactly the same color? It looks maybe a shade off in this light." Ilara knew they were fabricating flaws, seeking to diminish her work further. "The thread is a perfect match, sourced from the original dye lot information provided," Ilara said, her voice tightening despite her efforts. "And there is no bunching. The drape is exactly as it should be. Ms. Sterling sighed dramatically. Look, just leave it. I'll have our own ateliers double-check it before it goes to the client. The implication was clear. Ilara's work wasn't trusted. Bianca, deal with the payment. She turned away, dismissing Ilara completely, already moving towards her next task. Bianca picked up an envelope from under the counter. Sign here, she said, pushing a digital signature pad towards Ilara without making eye contact. Ilara signed, her hand steady despite the tremor of anger inside. Bianca handed her the envelope, thin and clearly holding only the standard pre-agreed fee. A fee that felt insulting given the skill involved and the disrespect endured. Use the service entrance next time, Bianca added curtly, as Ilara turned to leave, tucking the envelope into her bag. It's more appropriate. Ilara didn't respond. She walked towards the imposing glass doors, feeling the weight of their collective judgment pressing down on her. As the doors hissed shut behind her, cutting off the cool air and low music, she felt a profound sense of weariness. It wasn't just the mockery, it was the erasure. In their eyes, her craft, her identity as a skilled artisan, was worthless simply because she didn't fit their mold of glamour and wealth. She was just the working woman, the outdated seamstress, easily dismissed and quickly forgotten. The Chicago wind whipped around her as she stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, but the chill she felt went much deeper than the weather. It settled in her bones, a cold reminder of a world that often valued shine over substance. Ilara lived in a small, tidy apartment in a neighborhood far removed from the gleam of the Magnificent Mile. Her living room doubled as her workshop, dominated by a large cutting table, 2 industrial sewing machines, and shelves overflowing with fabrics, threads, patterns, and tools of her trade. It was cluttered but organized, every item holding a purpose, a history. This was her sanctuary, the place where her hands brought ideas to life, where the quiet hum of the machine was a comforting rhythm. Tonight, however, the familiar space felt different. The sting of the boutique staff's condescension lingered, souring the atmosphere. She sank onto her worn velvet armchair, the envelope from Aura lying untouched on the table beside her. It wasn't about the money, though she relied on every job. It was the blatant disrespect, the assumption that because her clothes weren't designer and her hands showed the marks of labor, her skills were somehow inferior. She sighed, running a hand over her tired eyes. Was Liam right? Was she just a relic, clinging to outdated methods in a world hurtling towards technological perfection and disposable everything? She looked at her hands, strong, capable, etched with the fine lines and calluses earned over 40 years of manipulating fabric and thread. These hands had created christening gowns, wedding dresses, restored fragile heirlooms, and yes, even crafted the initial prototypes for a brand that now considered her an embarrassing anomaly. She closed her eyes, a memory surfacing, a tiny, cramped workshop above a bakery, the smell of yeast mingling with the scent of sizing spray. Her younger self, fueled by passion and instant coffee, sketching designs late into the night, dreaming of creating garments that were more than just clothes, pieces that told a story, that lasted. That dream had become Aura, or at least it had started as Aura. She had founded the company decades ago anonymously. It was born from her vision of blending timeless craftsmanship with innovative design. She poured her soul, her savings, and every waking moment into it. For the first few years, she was Aura, the designer, the pattern maker, the seamstress, the packer, the shipper. She'd chosen anonymity deliberately, wanting the focus to be solely on the quality and artistry of the clothes, not on a personality. As the brand grew, attracting attention and eventually investors, she brought in others, business minds who could handle the expansion, the marketing, the scaling up that she found overwhelming. She stayed on for a while as the hidden creative force, the final arbiter of quality, the keeper of the brand's soul, communicating through trusted intermediaries. But the relentless pace, the corporate maneuvering, the shift away from bespoke quality towards mass luxury, it had worn her down. Eventually, seeking a quieter life and disillusioned by the direction the brand was taking under new leadership, she had sold her remaining carefully anonymized shares and stepped away completely, retaining only the silent knowledge of her creation and a small independent business doing the intricate work she truly loved. No one currently at Aura, certainly not the transient boutique staff or the bottom-line focused executives, knew the truth. She was a ghost in her own machine. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine work. Ilara finished alterations for her regular clients, neighborhood residents, a local theater company, a vintage clothing dealer who appreciated her expertise with delicate fabrics. She tried to push the incident at the Aura boutique out of her mind, channeling her frustration into her work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of needle and thread. Yet, a shadow lingered. She saw Aura advertisements on buses, read articles online about their upcoming Purity Collection launch, hailed as revolutionary, the event that would solidify Aura's position at the pinnacle of global fashion. She recognized fragments in the designs, echoes of her original philosophy, now twisted into something slicker, colder, mass-produced. There was a particular signature stitch, a complex, almost invisible way of joining dissimilar fabrics that she had pioneered. It was subtly present in some of the preview images, a ghost of her touch remaining within the machine. Then the whispers started. Online fashion forums buzzed with rumors of trouble, delays in production, quality control issues, whispers that the centerpiece of the Purity Collection, a gown touted as a marvel of engineering and design, was proving problematic. Ilara felt a strange pang, a mixture of detachment and a lingering, unwelcome sense of responsibility. It was her name, her legacy, however hidden, that was potentially being tarnished. One rainy Thursday afternoon, her phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number with a downtown Chicago prefix. She hesitated before answering.
Hello?
Is this Ilara Vance, the seamstress? The voice was tight, strained. Ilara recognized it instantly, Anya Sterling. Yes, this is she, Ilara replied, her guard immediately up. There was a pause, filled with what sounded like barely suppressed panic. Miss Vance, we have a situation, an emergency. Ilara remained silent, waiting. It's the centerpiece gown for the Purity Collection launch, Miss Sterling rushed on, her usual frosty composure completely gone. There's been an accident, a catastrophic structural failure during the final fitting. The main bodice seam, it's completely given way and the fabric is unraveling. Our internal team, they can't fix it, not without ruining the drape. The launch is in 2 days. It's irreplaceable. Ilara pictured the gown from the press photos. Layers of ethereal, almost weightless bioluminescent fabric, fused with rigid, sculpted panels. Complex, ambitious, and, Ilara suspected, fundamentally flawed in its construction if rushed. Why are you calling me Mrs. Sterling? Ilara asked, her voice level. Because... Miss Sterling hesitated, the word catching in her throat. Because someone remembered you mentioned working with experimental synthetics and your repair work on that other gown, even though Bianca thought... She trailed off, clearly finding it difficult to swallow her pride. Look, we're desperate. The lead designer is in Milan, unreachable. No one here knows how to handle this material, this kind of seam. They say it needs some kind of hand-finishing technique. Something about stabilizing the weave before restitching. Ilara recognized the problem instantly. It required the very stitch she had seen ghosted in their other designs, her signature technique for joining delicate, unstable fabrics under tension. A technique she had developed and perfected, documented only in her private notebooks from Aura's earliest days. Can you help us? Miss Sterling's voice was pleading now, stripped of its earlier arrogance. We'll pay anything. Name your price. Please, Miss Vance. The entire collection launch hinges on this. Ilara thought of the mockery, the condescension, the casual cruelty of Bianca and Liam enabled by Miss Sterling herself. She thought of being made to feel small and irrelevant in the very building that her dream had built. A sharp, satisfying refusal formed on her lips. But then she thought of the gown itself, the potential beauty marred by technical failure, the craft betrayed by haste and perhaps ignorance. And deeper still, a flicker of the old pride, the creator's instinct to mend what was broken, especially when it bore her hidden fingerprint. Where is the gown now? Ilara asked quietly. It's here, at the boutique, in my office, Miss Sterling replied, relief flooding her voice. "Can you come now?" "I will be there in an hour," Ilara said, her decision made. Not for them, perhaps, but for the integrity of the craft, and maybe, just maybe, for herself. She hung up the phone, a strange mix of apprehension and resolve settling over her. She gathered her finest needles, specialized threads, and a small, unassuming wooden tool she had fashioned herself decades ago, the key to the complex stitch. This time, she wouldn't be just a delivery person. This time, she was walking back into the heart of Aura, carrying the solution they didn't know they needed, from the person they thought they knew. The atmosphere inside the Aura boutique was thick with tension. Gone was the cool, languid indifference. Staff members rushed back and forth, faces tight with anxiety. Bianca and Liam stood near Miss Sterling's office, their usual chic composure replaced with visible stress. Bianca was nervously chewing her lip, while Liam kept running agitated hands through his perfect hair. When Ilara walked in, carrying her simple canvas tool bag, all activity seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Bianca's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face before she quickly schooled it into a neutral mask. Liam looked away, a faint flush rising on his neck. Ms. Sterling practically lunged out of her office. "Ms. Vance, thank God you're here." Her voice was several octaves higher than usual. "This way, quickly." She led Ilara into her office, a minimalist space now dominated by the wounded gown, carefully laid out on a large table under bright spotlights. Several other people were huddled around it, members of the design team, perhaps, looking pale and defeated. The damage was worse than Ilara had imagined. The main seam holding the sculpted bodice to the ethereal skirt hadn't just torn. The delicate, high-tech fabric around it was fraying rapidly, unraveling like fine sugar strands. It was a disaster. "See," Ms. Sterling gestured frantically. "We tried pinning it, fusing tape, but nothing holds. The fabric just disintegrates under any stress. The show is tomorrow night. The investors, the press, everyone is coming." Ilara approached the table, ignoring the anxious stares. She gently touched the damaged fabric, her fingers assessing the weave, the tension, the nature of the synthetic fibers. It was ambitious, beautiful, but fundamentally unstable without the correct support structure integrated into the seam itself. A basic principle she had insisted upon in her original design manifesto for Aura, a principle clearly forgotten or ignored in the pursuit of a sleeker silhouette. She recognized the core material, an experimental textile she herself had sourced years ago, noting its potential but also its fragility. "Move aside, please," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the panicked energy in the room. The others hesitated, looking at Ms. Sterling, who nodded curtly. They shuffled back, giving Ilara space. Bianca and Liam lingered in the doorway, watching with a mixture of skepticism and morbid curiosity. Ilara opened her tool bag, laying out her implements with quiet precision: fine needles, threads that seemed almost invisible, small clamps, and the unique wooden tool. She sat down, adjusted the lamp, and peered closely at the damage through a magnifying lens she produced from her bag. Silence descended on the office, broken only by the distant hum of the boutique and Miss Sterling's ragged breathing. "This fabric requires a specific tension release stitch before the main seam can be reconstructed," Ilara murmured, more to herself than anyone else, as she selected a needle. "Otherwise, the stress concentrates along the join, causing fiber fracture." "A what stitch?" one of the younger designers asked, frowning. "I've never heard of that." "It's not in any standard textbook," Ilara replied without looking up. "It's a foundational technique for working with unstable synthetics." She began to work, her hands moving with an astonishing blend of speed and delicacy. Her fingers danced across the fabric, manipulating the fine threads with an expertise that was mesmerizing. She used the strange wooden tool to hold microsections of the weave steady as she introduced almost invisible supporting stitches, stabilizing the fraying edges. Bianca whispered something to Liam from the doorway, probably another dismissive comment, but Ilara ignored them. She was lost in the work, the familiar concentration pushing everything else away, the intricate dance of needle and thread, the challenge of mending the irreparable. This was where she felt most herself. Time seemed to warp. Minutes stretched, marked only by the rhythmic, near-silent pass of Ilara's needle. The tension in the room shifted from panic to grudging respect, then to outright awe. The younger designers watched, leaning closer, their expressions rapt. Even Ms. Sterling stood motionless, her earlier desperation replaced by focused intensity. The way Ilara worked, it wasn't just skill, it was an innate understanding of the material, as if she were communicating with the fabric itself. As she began reconstructing the main seam, using her signature interlocking stitch, Ms. Sterling suddenly gasped. That stitch? I've seen that before, in the archives, in the original design sketches for the Genesis collection. She looked at Ilara, her eyes wide with dawning realization. Those sketches, they were anonymous, just signed with a symbol, a stylized EV. Ilara didn't pause in her work, but her hands tightened fractionally on the needle. The Genesis collection was Aura's foundation, she said quietly. It established the principles. But how do you know that stitch? Ms. Sterling pressed, stepping closer. It hasn't been used in years. The technical files only mention it vaguely. No one could replicate it. They said only the original founder truly mastered it. Her voice trailed off as the pieces clicked into place in her mind. The anonymity, the mastery, the initials, the symbol. She looked from the gown to Ilara's focused face, then down at the small, unassuming wooden tool in Ilara's hand, shaped almost like a stylized E. Her face went pale. You mentioned foundational techniques, Ms. Sterling whispered, her voice trembling slightly. You talk about this fabric like you know its soul, that stitch, those initials. Bianca and Liam, drawn by the sudden shift in tone, stepped fully into the office. What's going on, Anya? Bianca asked, still oblivious. Ms. Sterling ignored her, her gaze locked on Ilara. It can't be, she stammered. The founder, she disappeared years ago, sold her shares anonymously. No one knows who she is. Ilara finally paused. She carefully secured the last stitch, the seam now perfect, the fabric stabilized, the gown restored to its intended glory. She looked up, meeting Ms. Sterling's shocked gaze directly. Her expression was calm, devoid of triumph or malice, just a quiet statement of fact that had been hidden for far too long. Aura was built on craftsmanship, Mrs. Sterling, Ilara said, her voice steady and clear, resonating in the stunned silence of the room. On understanding the materials, respecting the process, principles that seemed to have been forgotten. She gently ran a finger along the flawless seam she had just created. I know the stitch because I invented it. I know the fabric because I sourced it. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. I know Aura's soul because I gave it life. She looked directly at the horrified faces of Bianca and Liam, then back to the utterly thunderstruck Ms. Sterling. My name is Ilara Vance, and I am the founder of Aura. The silence that followed was absolute, deafening. Bianca gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth, her face draining of all color, as the memory of her earlier mockery flashed in her eyes. Liam looked like he might faint, swaying slightly on his feet. The younger designers stared, mouths agape. Ms. Sterling seemed unable to breathe, her carefully constructed world shattering around her. The unassuming, plainly dressed seamstress they had mocked, dismissed and condescended to, the woman they had relegated to the service entrance, was the visionary creator of the entire global brand, the anonymous legend whispered about in reverent tones within the industry. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. Every dismissive glance, every snide comment, every condescending word replayed in their minds, now cast in the horrifying light of the truth. They hadn't just insulted a working woman, they had belittled the very architect of their careers, the source of the aura mystique they so proudly upheld. Ms. Sterling finally found her voice, a choked whisper. I had no idea. Oh my God. She looked physically ill. Bianca burst into tears, mumbling apologies. Liam simply stared at the floor, unable to meet Ilara's gaze. Ilara slowly stood up, gathering her tools. She looked at the restored gown, a masterpiece saved from ruin by the very hands the brand's current custodians had scorned. She felt no anger now, only a profound sense of vindication, a quiet affirmation of her worth that transcended their judgment. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted, not through shouting or demands, but through the simple, undeniable truth of her identity and her skill. The highest echelons of Aura leadership were alerted immediately, arriving at the boutique in a state of controlled panic and disbelief, only to be met with the calm presence of Ilara Vance and the perfectly repaired centerpiece gown. The fallout for Ms. Sterling, Bianca and Liam was swift and decisive, their careers at Aura ending abruptly that very day. The Purity Collection launch went ahead, the centerpiece gown earning rave reviews, its miraculous recovery becoming a whispered legend, intertwined with the even more shocking revelation of the founder's identity. Ilara, however, declined the offers to return to a formal role at Aura. Instead, armed with newfound recognition and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming her legacy, she finally opened her own small, exclusive atelier in a charming brownstone, not far from her apartment. It quickly became a haven for those who appreciated true craftsmanship, attracting clients who valued substance over empty labels, artistry over fleeting trends. Ilara Vance, the working woman, the seamstress, the anonymous founder, had finally stepped into the light, not as a corporate figurehead, but as the master artisan she had always been, her worth finally recognized, her hands finally celebrated. This story reminds us that true value often lies hidden beneath the surface. A working woman's worth is defined by her character, her skill, and her resilience, not by the clothes she wears or the judgment of others. Prejudice may try to diminish her light, but talent, integrity, and the quiet power of truth will ultimately shine through. Never underestimate the hands that build, create, and mend, for they may hold the blueprint to the very world that overlooks them. Respect the craft, honor the creator, regardless of appearances. How often do we measure a person's worth by the job title they hold or the uniform they wear? In the polished corridors of power and privilege, it's easy to overlook the quiet dignity and profound influence of those who work in the background, their contributions unseen, their wisdom unheard. Consider the hands that clean, that care, that nurture, often dismissed as just the help. But what if those very hands shaped a mind destined for greatness? What if a working woman, subjected to scorn in an environment that worships status, held the secret key to its most celebrated success? This is the story of such a woman, whose presence was questioned, whose worth was doubted, but whose impact was about to stun everyone into silence. Ask yourself, where does true mentorship really come from? Maria Alvarez smoothed down the front of her navy blue cardigan, a nervous habit she couldn't seem to shake whenever she had to step foot inside the imposing gates of Oakwood Preparatory Academy. The school rose from manicured lawns like a fortress of legacy and wealth, its Gothic architecture speaking of generations of privilege. Maria wasn't a parent, not in the biological sense, nor in the sense this institution typically recognized. She was the caretaker, the maid for the Henderson family, and more importantly to her, she was the primary caregiver for 12-year-old Isabella Henderson. Today was the fall parent-teacher conference, and Mrs. Henderson, perpetually occupied with charity galas and board meetings, had dispatched Maria in her stead with a sigh and a vague instruction to just get the gist of it. Mr. Henderson was, as usual, on an extended business trip overseas. So Maria, armed with a worn notebook and a heart full of genuine concern for Isabella's progress, walked towards the oak-paneled entrance, feeling the weight of judgmental eyes even before she crossed the threshold. Her clothes were simple, clean, and practical. Dark slacks, the cardigan, sensible flat shoes, an invisible uniform that screamed staff in a sea of cashmere wraps, tailored suits, and designer handbags. The main hall buzzed with the low hum of expensive chatter. Parents gathered in small exclusive clusters, exchanging updates on European vacations and stock portfolios. The air smelled faintly of money, a blend of subtle perfumes, leather briefcases, and an underlying confidence that bordered on arrogance. Maria clutched her notebook tighter, her knuckles white. She knew Isabella was doing exceptionally well, a bright, inquisitive child with a mind like a sponge, but navigating this social minefield felt like walking through uncharted territory filled with hidden traps. She located the sign for Ms. Evans, Isabella's homeroom and science teacher, and joined the short queue outside the classroom. Immediately, she felt the shift in atmosphere. A woman ahead of her, dripping in understated gold jewelry and wearing a perfectly tailored Chanel suit, Mrs. Davenport, mother of Isabella's classmate Chloe, turned slightly, her eyes doing a slow, deliberate scan of Maria from head to toe. The woman offered a tight, condescending smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello," Mrs. Davenport said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Are you here for pickup?" Maria felt a flush creep up her neck. "No, Mrs. Davenport, I'm here for Isabella Henderson's conference." Mrs. Davenport's eyebrows shot up into her perfectly sculpted hairline. Isabella Henderson? Really? She lowered her voice conspiratorially, leaning slightly towards the man beside her, a Mr. Sterling clad in a crisp pinstripe suit. "Isn't that unusual? Shouldn't her parents be attending?" Mr. Sterling adjusted his tie, looking down his nose at Maria. "Indeed, these conferences are crucial for parental involvement in charting the child's academic trajectory. One wonders about the Hendersons' priorities." His gaze lingered on Maria's simple attire before flicking away dismissively. "Mrs. Henderson was unable to attend," Maria said, keeping her voice steady despite the tremor of humiliation inside. "She asked me to come." "Asked you?" Mrs. Davenport scoffed lightly, sharing an amused look with Mr. Sterling. "Well, I suppose someone has to show up, but—" She leaned in again, her voice barely a whisper but sharp enough to cut. "What insights could you possibly offer? Does Isabella discuss quantum physics with you over dusting?" Mr. Sterling chuckled dryly. "Perhaps the intricacies of particle acceleration during floor waxing?" The cruelty of their words, veiled in polite society banter, struck Maria like a physical blow. They saw her uniform, her role, and dismissed her utterly. They couldn't fathom that the woman who cleaned the Hendersons' sprawling mansion might also be the person who patiently explained algebraic equations to Isabella, who stayed up late helping her build the miniature ecosystem for the science fair, who listened to her fears and dreams when her own parents were too preoccupied. They didn't know that Maria, who had only completed high school herself before needing to work full-time, devoured library books on physics and astronomy simply because Isabella was fascinated by them, wanting to be able to answer her endless questions. "Isabella and I discuss many things," Maria replied quietly, lifting her chin. "She is a remarkable girl." "Of course she is," Mrs. Davenport said dismissively, turning her back as the classroom door opened and her turn arrived. "Chloe finds her intense." Maria waited, feeling the sting of tears prickling behind her eyes but refusing to let them fall. She took slow, deep breaths, focusing on Isabella. She was here for Isabella. That was all that mattered. When her turn came, Ms. Evans, a kind but slightly harried young teacher, greeted her professionally. "Ms. Alvarez, thank you for coming," Ms. Evans said, gesturing for her to sit. The teacher seemed slightly uncomfortable, clearly aware of the social dynamics at play, but trying to remain neutral. "Isabella is, as you know, an absolute star. Her work in advanced science is already at a high school level. Her latest project proposal for the National Youth Science Challenge, it's groundbreaking." "I know," Maria smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest, momentarily eclipsing the earlier hurt. She worked so hard on the theoretical framework. We spent weeks researching dark matter hypotheses. Ms. Evans blinked, surprised. "Oh, you helped her with that?" "We explore her ideas together," Maria said simply. "I try to help her find the resources she needs." "I see," Ms. Evans murmured, making a note. The rest of the conference was positive, confirming Isabella's academic brilliance and quiet determination. But as Maria left the classroom, she overheard Mrs. Davenport talking animatedly to another mother just down the hall. "Can you believe it? They sent the maid. What is this school coming to? It reflects poorly on all of us, letting standards slip like that. I pay exorbitant tuition for Chloe to be surrounded by the right kind of influences, not, well, you know. The other mother nodded vigorously in agreement, casting a pitying glance towards Maria as she walked past. Maria hurried out of the building, the cold autumn air hitting her face. The casual cruelty, the ingrained prejudice, it left a bitter taste in her mouth. They judged her hands, her clothes, her job, assuming they defined the limits of her mind and her heart. They had no idea who Isabella Henderson truly confided in, who nurtured her extraordinary intellect, who provided the stable, loving presence that allowed her genius to flourish. They saw a maid. They didn't see the mentor, the confidant, the unwavering supporter who believed in Isabella long before any national awards were on the horizon. She clutched her notebook, the positive report from Miss Evans, suddenly feeling inadequate against the weight of their scorn. But then she thought of Isabella's bright eyes, her infectious curiosity, the award ceremony scheduled for the following week, where Isabella would be honored for her science project. Maria had to be there for her, no matter what the Mrs. Davenports of the world thought. Isabella had specifically asked her, her eyes shining. "You'll come, won't you, Mary? It's important." And Maria wouldn't dream of letting her down. The days leading up to the award ceremony were filled with a quiet hum of anticipation in the Henderson household, though mostly generated by Isabella and Maria. Isabella was a whirlwind of nervous energy, double-checking her presentation notes, practicing her potential acceptance speech, while Maria ensured her favorite dress was perfectly pressed and offered calming words and steady encouragement. Mrs. Henderson expressed brief, distracted pride, already focused on organizing a suitable celebratory dinner at an exclusive restaurant. Mr. Henderson sent a congratulatory email from Tokyo. It was Maria who sat with Isabella late into the evening before the ceremony, talking not about science but about courage, about handling pressure, about being true to oneself. "What if I freeze up, Mari?" Isabella whispered, fiddling with a loose thread on her blanket. "You won't," Maria said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You know your work better than anyone. Just speak from your heart. Think about why you love exploring the universe." She smiled. "Remember when we stayed up all night watching the meteor shower? How excited you were, channel that wonder?" Maria remembered countless nights like these. While the Hendersons attended late-night functions or were absorbed in their own worlds, Maria was the one supervising homework, reading bedtime stories, listening to tales of playground politics, and providing scraped-knee comfort. She had taught Isabella her first Spanish words, cooked her favorite comfort foods from her own childhood recipes, and shared stories of her village back home, grounding the privileged child in realities beyond the Oakwood bubble. She had noticed Isabella's fascination with how things worked, nurturing it by bringing home discarded electronics for her to dismantle, finding documentaries about female scientists, setting up makeshift experiments in the kitchen using vinegar and baking soda. When Isabella's project hit a complex mathematical hurdle, Maria, despite her own limitations, spent hours at the public library researching, finally finding a simplified explanation online that helped Isabella grasp the concept. Their bond was woven from thousands of these small shared moments, moments invisible to the outside world, especially the world of Oakwood Preparatory Academy. The humiliation at the parent-teacher conference still stung. Maria found herself replaying the condescending words, the dismissive glances. A part of her dreaded returning to Oakwood, facing those same parents again. What right did she have to sit among them, pretending to belong? She was just the maid. But then she thought of Isabella's face, her trust, her quiet insistence. "Please be there, Mari." Her love for the child outweighed her own discomfort. She would endure the stares and whispers for Isabella. She chose her outfit carefully, a simple dark grey dress, modest but elegant, her best shoes, her hair neatly pinned back. She wanted to look respectable for Isabella's sake, even though she knew it likely wouldn't change the perceptions of people like Mrs. Davenport. On the evening of the ceremony, the school auditorium buzzed with an electric energy. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the plush velvet seats, packed with Oakwood's elite, parents in glittering evening wear, influential alumni, board members, even the mayor. Maria slipped in quietly, finding an empty seat near the back, hoping to remain inconspicuous. She saw Mrs. Davenport and Mr. Sterling seated prominently near the front, chatting animatedly, radiating smug satisfaction. Mrs. Henderson sat several rows ahead, impeccably dressed, occasionally checking her phone. Maria's heart pounded nervously, both for Isabella and for herself. The ceremony began with the requisite pomp and circumstance. The headmaster delivered a sonorous speech about Oakwood's legacy of excellence. Various dignitaries lauded the school's achievements. Awards were presented for athletics, arts, and community service, met with polite applause. Maria scanned the rows for Isabella, finding her seated with other award recipients near the stage, looking small but composed in her best dress, the one Maria had carefully ironed. Finally, the moment arrived. The headmaster announced the National Youth Science Challenge Award, his voice booming with pride. This prestigious award recognizes groundbreaking work by our nation's most promising young scientists. This year's recipient from Oakwood Preparatory Academy has astonished the judges with her innovative theoretical model addressing inconsistencies in dark matter observation. Please join me in congratulating the incredibly talented Miss Isabella Henderson. Thunderous applause erupted as Isabella walked gracefully towards the stage. She accepted the large, gleaming trophy, shaking the headmaster's hand, her expression serious, but her eyes sparkling under the bright lights. She looked so mature, so brilliant. Maria felt a swell of immense pride, tears finally blurring her vision. This was Isabella's moment. "Isabella, would you like to say a few words?" the headmaster prompted, gesturing towards the microphone. Isabella stepped up, adjusting the microphone stand, which was slightly too tall for her. She took a deep breath, scanning the large audience. The auditorium fell silent, expectantly. "Thank you, headmaster," she began, her voice clear and steady, belying her nerves. "Thank you to the National Youth Science Challenge Committee for this incredible honor. Thank you to Oakwood and my teachers, especially Ms. Evans, for their support." She paused, her eyes sweeping the rows of faces. Then her gaze locked onto Maria's way at the back. A small, warm smile touched Isabella's lips. What came next shifted the very atmosphere of the room. It happened in an instant, a sudden, sharp deviation from the expected script. Everyone thinks that brilliance just happens, or that it comes from fancy schools or having parents with important jobs, Isabella stated, her voice gaining strength, ringing with conviction. The confident tone faltered slightly, replaced by raw emotion. "And my parents, I know they're proud and I appreciate the opportunities I have." She glanced briefly towards her mother, who offered a strained smile. "But the person who truly deserves to be standing here with me, the person who taught me how to think critically, who spent countless hours helping me untangle complex problems when I was ready to give up, who encouraged my curiosity even when it meant taking apart the toaster oven." A ripple of confused murmurs went through the audience. Mrs. Davenport leaned forward, frowning. "The person who showed me the stars and explained gravitational lensing using oranges and a bedsheet, that person isn't my mom or dad." Isabella lifted her chin, her gaze unwavering, finding Maria again in the back row. Her voice resonated, clear and bold, cutting through the stunned silence. "That person is Maria Alvarez." She pointed directly, unmistakably towards Maria. Every head in the auditorium swiveled, following her gesture. Hundreds of eyes, previously filled with pride or indifference, now focused on the simply dressed woman in the back row. Maria froze, her heart leaping into her throat. This wasn't happening. "Yes, Maria," Isabella continued, her voice ringing with heartfelt sincerity, seemingly oblivious to the shockwaves she was creating. "She's our housekeeper. She cleans our house. But she's so much more than that. She's my mentor. She's my champion. She taught me Spanish. She reads physics articles just to discuss them with me. She believed in my project from the very beginning, even when I wasn't sure. She stayed up with me night after night, helping me research test theories and build models. She taught me the value of hard work, resilience, and kindness." Isabella's eyes glistened. "She's the smartest, strongest, most dedicated person I know. This award, it belongs just as much to her as it does to me. Thank you, Marie, for everything." The silence stretched thick and heavy. You could hear a pin drop. Maria sat stunned, tears streaming down her face now, a mixture of shock, gratitude, and overwhelming love for the child on the stage. The spotlight, figuratively and almost literally, was on her. Then slowly, the camera feed projecting onto the large screens beside the stage zoomed in, first on Isabella's earnest face, then panning slowly, deliberately, to find Maria in the back row. Her simple dress, her tear-streaked face, her quiet dignity were broadcast for all to see. The camera then lingered almost cruelly on the faces in the front rows. Mrs. Davenport looked aghast, her mouth slightly open, her face crimson. Mr. Sterling stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, avoiding looking at anyone. Mrs. Henderson appeared deeply uncomfortable, shifting in her seat. The public declaration, the heartfelt tribute from Oakwood's star pupil to her family's maid, had shattered their carefully constructed world of assumptions and hierarchies. The working woman they had disrespected, dismissed, and deemed unworthy of even attending a conference was the secret architect behind the very success they were celebrating. A tentative, scattered applause began, growing slowly, uncertainly at first, then swelling as the weight of Isabella's words sank in. Teachers exchanged stunned looks. Some parents looked humbled, others deeply embarrassed. The headmaster cleared his throat, looking flustered, unsure how to proceed after such a breach of protocol, such a raw, unexpected testament. Isabella, finished speaking, stepped back from the microphone, her eyes still fixed on Maria, offering a small, trembling smile. After the ceremony concluded, amidst a buzz of shocked whispers and averted gazes, Maria remained rooted to her seat until Isabella rushed down the aisle towards her, trophy clutched in her hand. "Marie, you heard!" Isabella threw her arms around Maria, burying her face in her shoulder. "I heard, Mika," Maria whispered, hugging her tightly. "I'm so proud of you, not just for the award, but for your courage." As they walked towards the exit, deliberately avoiding the main throng, Ms. Evans intercepted them, her eyes full of newfound respect. "Ms. Alvarez, Isabella, that was truly remarkable, both of you." Even the headmaster approached, offering Maria a slightly awkward but sincere nod. "Your contribution is clearly invaluable, Ms. Alvarez, profoundly so." Maria caught sight of Mrs. Davenport hurrying away, her face averted, avoiding eye contact at all costs. Mr. Sterling was already gone. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by palpable shame. They had been publicly confronted with their prejudice, exposed not by anger or accusation, but by the simple, powerful truth delivered from the heart of a child they admired. Maria Alvarez walked out of Oakwood Preparatory Academy, holding Isabella's hand, her head held high. The whispers followed them, but they were different now. Whispers of awe, of respect, of a stunning revelation. The working woman, the maid, had been seen, finally and fully, not just for the work of her hands, but for the immeasurable impact of her heart and mind. This story teaches us the folly of judging individuals by their profession or appearance. True influence and mentorship often bloom in unexpected places, nurtured by dedication, kindness, and genuine care, qualities that transcend social status or wealth. A working woman's contribution might be quiet, performed away from the spotlight, but its impact can shape futures and inspire greatness. Never underestimate the power of unseen efforts or the depth of wisdom hidden within a humble heart. It might just be the foundation upon which brilliance is built. The relentless rhythm of the assembly line, the ache settling deep in weary shoulders after hours of meticulous labor. This is the often unseen, undervalued pulse of our cities. We measure success in gleaming offices and crisp suits, easily overlooking the quiet dignity and resilience forged in places like factories. Elena Sandoval lived this reality, her days defined by hard work and a paycheck stretched thin. Yet unknown to her and the world that judged her worn clothes, a hidden legacy lay waiting, a staggering secret poised to shatter every assumption. What unfolds when the dismissed inherit not just vindication, but a fortune beyond imagining. This is Elena's story, a testament to the unexpected turns life takes, especially for a working woman underestimated by all. Elena Sandoval traced the faint crack spiderwebbing across her apartment ceiling. Rain was forecast for tonight, and the familiar drip, drip, drip onto the strategically placed bucket in the living room would soon begin its melancholic symphony. It wasn't just an annoyance, it was a symptom of a larger problem: the aging building, the landlord's indifference, and her own perpetually tight budget. That crack, like so many things in her life, needed fixing, and fixing cost money she didn't have. That's why she found herself standing outside the imposing glass doors of Sterling Citibank's downtown branch, clutching a worn folder containing her pay stubs and a carefully filled out loan application. Taking a deep breath, smelling the city mix of exhaust fumes and roasted nuts from a nearby vendor, she pushed the heavy door open. The sudden hush of the bank's interior, the cool, conditioned air and the gleaming marble floors felt like stepping into another world, far removed from the rhythmic clang and greasy air of the factory where she spent 10 hours a day assembling circuit boards. Her work pants, though clean, bore faint stains that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove, and her simple cotton shirt felt inadequate under the recessed lighting. She clutched her folder tighter, approaching the polished information desk. A woman with immaculate hair and a practiced smile directed her toward the loan department. "Mr. Henderson will see you. Third cubicle on the left." Eleanor murmured her thanks and walked down the carpeted hallway, her sensible work boots sinking slightly with each step, feeling acutely aware of the contrast between herself and the tailored suits and crisp blouses moving around her. Mr. Henderson's cubicle was neat, dominated by a large monitor displaying complex graphs. He was a man in his late 40s, with thinning hair combed precisely over his scalp and glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't stand or offer a hand when Elena approached, merely gesturing towards the uncomfortable-looking plastic chair opposite his desk. "Elena Sandoval?" he asked, his tone flat, already scanning the application form she'd placed before him. "Yes, that's me. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Henderson." He grunted non-committally, his eyes flicking from the paper up to her face, then down to her clothes, lingering for a moment on her hands. Hands that were clean, but showed the undeniable signs of manual labor. A faint, almost imperceptible curl touched his lip. "Purpose of the loan?" he clipped, tapping the relevant box on the form. It's for some urgent repairs on my apartment, sir," Elena explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "The roof leaks badly, and the landlord won't fix it properly. It's causing damage, mold. I need to hire someone myself before it gets worse. Just $2,000, that's all I need." Henderson leaned back, steepling his fingers. His gaze was condescending, appraising. "Apartment repairs for a rental? That's the landlord's responsibility, Ms. Sandoval, not yours, and certainly not the bank's." "I know, but he just patches it and it leaks again. He says if I don't like it, I can move. But moving costs money too, deposits, first month's rent. This is cheaper and it would fix the problem for good. I've gotten quotes." She pushed a folded piece of paper with estimates towards him, but he waved it away dismissively. "Let's look at your income." He picked up her pay stubs, holding them gingerly as if they might soil his fingers. He hummed, a low, skeptical sound. "Factory worker, assembly line, minimum wage, I presume." "A little above minimum, sir. I've been there 5 years. Perfect attendance." Elena offered this information with a touch of pride, but Henderson seemed unimpressed. 5 years? And this is the income level? Ms. Sandoval, banks lend money based on capacity to repay. We look for financial stability, responsible planning. Spending money on a property you don't own, it doesn't exactly scream fiscal prudence, does it? His tone was laced with superiority, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. Elena felt a flush creep up her neck. "It's not imprudent, sir. It's necessary. Living with a leaking roof and mold isn't healthy, and I am responsible. I've budgeted carefully. I can afford the monthly payments. I calculated it, $50 a month over 4 years, I can manage that. She had spent hours with a calculator, figuring out how to trim her already lean expenses to make room for the payment. Henderson chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. $50. Yes, perhaps you could manage that, assuming nothing else goes wrong. A car repair, an unexpected medical bill. People in your situation often live paycheck to paycheck. One minor setback, and suddenly that $50 becomes impossible. We can't take that risk. He tapped her application form with a dismissive flick of his finger. Your credit score is adequate, barely. But your income-to-debt ratio, considering your low wages and existing modest obligations, is too high for us to approve this, especially for such a questionable purpose. Elena felt a surge of anger mixed with humiliation. Questionable? Keeping my home safe and dry is questionable? What do you think I am, Mr. Henderson? I work hard, 10 hours a day, sometimes more. I pay my bills on time. I'm not asking for a handout. I'm asking for a small loan that I fully intend to repay with interest. Her voice trembled slightly, but she met his gaze directly. He seemed taken aback by her directness, but quickly recovered his condescending air. Intention is admirable, Miss Sandoval, but banking operates on facts and risk assessment, not good intentions from working women struggling to make ends meet. The way he said working women was coated in pity that felt more like disdain. Perhaps you should focus on finding a better paying job before considering taking on more debt, or maybe cut back on unnecessary expenses. He gestured vaguely, as if imagining luxuries she couldn't possibly afford. Eleanor stood up abruptly, her chair scraping slightly on the floor. The humiliation was a burning knot in her stomach. There are no unnecessary expenses, Mr. Henderson, and my job is honest work. Thank you for your time. She reached for her folder, her hand shaking almost imperceptibly. He pushed the application back towards her. I'm sorry, Ms. Sandoval, but the answer is no. Loan denied. Bank policy. He didn't sound sorry at all. He sounded relieved, as if he'd successfully swatted away an annoying fly. Elena snatched her papers, turned without another word, and walked quickly out of the cubicle down the hallway, past the smiling information desk, and out through the heavy glass doors, back into the noise and grit of the city. The brief exposure to the bank's sterile opulence made her own world feel even harsher. Tears pricked her eyes, not just from the denial, but from the casual cruelty. The judgment layered thick in his voice, the assumption that because she worked with her hands and didn't earn a fortune, she was somehow less capable, less trustworthy, less worthy of respect. The $2,000 might as well have been $2 million. She blinked back the tears, straightened her shoulders, and started the long walk to the bus stop, the weight of the denied loan settling heavily upon her, adding to the burden of the leaking roof and the relentless demands of her life. The days following the bank rejection blurred into a familiar rhythm of weary resilience. The factory whistle blew at 6 a.m., signaling the start of another long shift. Elena stood at her station, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, connecting tiny wires, soldering components onto circuit boards under the harsh fluorescent lights. The air hummed with the drone of machinery and the low chatter of her co-workers. Maria, working at the next station, glanced over. Everything okay, Elena? You seem quiet today. Maria was older, kind-eyed, her face etched with the lines of someone who'd seen her share of struggles. Just tired, Maria. Thinking, Eleanor replied, forcing a small smile. She hadn't told anyone about the bank loan or the condescending Mr. Henderson. It felt too raw, too personal a failure. She needed that money, not just for the roof, but for the sliver of hope it represented. The hope of having a small measure of control over her environment, of making her small corner of the world a little more secure. The denial felt like another locked door in a life that already had too many. That evening, back in her small apartment, the rain started as predicted. Plink, plink, plonk. The sound echoed in the quiet room, each drop a reminder of her helplessness. She moved the bucket slightly, catching the main stream, but smaller drips were starting nearby. She sighed, looking around the sparsely furnished room. It wasn't much, but it was hers, filled with second-hand furniture she'd refinished herself and photos of her parents. Her father, a construction worker, had died in an accident when she was a teenager. Her mother, a gentlewoman who had worked as a hotel cleaner, had passed away from pneumonia just a few years ago, leaving Eleanor utterly alone. It was her mother who had given her the small, intricately carved wooden box just before she died. "This holds your future, Eleanor," she'd whispered, her voice weak. "My father. Your grandfather. He wasn't always easy, but he set something aside. For you. His lawyers will find you when the time is right. Don't lose this." Elena kept the box on her nightstand. Inside was just an old-fashioned silver locket containing faded miniature photos of people she assumed were her grandparents, strangers with stern faces, dressed in clothes from another era, and a small, oddly shaped key. She'd never known her maternal grandfather. Her mother rarely spoke of him, hinting at a family rift, a wealthy background left behind for love. Over the years, Elena had received occasional formal letters from a prestigious-sounding law firm, Worthington, Davies and Black. They spoke of delays in settling the estate of a Mr. Alistair Worthington, her grandfather, due to complex international holdings and legal challenges. The letters were dense with legal jargon she barely understood. She'd called once, years ago, and spoken to a junior associate who was polite but vague, mentioning trusts and probate courts. Given her mother's humble life and the lack of any concrete information, Eleanor had long since assumed the something set aside was probably a small keepsake, perhaps a few $1,000s at most, likely eaten up by legal fees. It felt like a distant fairy tale, completely disconnected from the reality of her life, the factory shifts, the leaking roof. She hadn't pinned any real hope on it. Her hope lay in her own hard work, her ability to endure. Sometimes, though, late at night, she'd open the box, trace the locket's engraving, and wonder about the life her mother left behind, about the stern-faced man in the photo. A few days later, another letter arrived from Worthington, Davies and Black. It looked different, thicker, sent via courier instead of regular mail. It requested her presence for an urgent meeting regarding the final settlement of the Worthington estate. It mentioned needing her signature on certain documents and asked her to bring identification and the key from the box her mother left her. It suggested meeting at the downtown branch of Sterling City Bank in their private client suite for convenience, as some assets were being transferred there. Elena stared at the letter, her heart giving an unsteady lurch. Sterling City Bank, the place of her recent humiliation. Why there? And why now? After all these years of silence and vague updates. A wave of cynicism washed over her. Maybe they needed her signature to officially close the file, confirming there was nothing left. Still, her mother's words echoed, "This holds your future." She decided she had to go. Maybe, just maybe, there would be enough to finally fix the roof. She requested a half-day off work, a difficult ask given the current production rush, but her supervisor reluctantly agreed. She chose her outfit carefully, not her work clothes, but her best dress. A simple navy blue sheath dress she'd bought on sale years ago for a co-worker's wedding. It was modest, but neat. She even put on a touch of mascara and lipstick, feeling strangely self-conscious. Holding the small wooden box containing the locket and key, she felt a flicker of nervous anticipation mixed with dread as she approached the bank again, the memory of Mr. Henderson's sneer still fresh in her mind. Eleanor entered Sterling City Bank with a sense of déjà vu, but this time she bypassed the main banking hall and the loan department, heading towards the discreetly marked entrance for private banking. A different receptionist, poised and polite, checked her name against a list. "Miss Sandoval, yes, Mr. Davies is expecting you. Please follow me." She led Elena through a plushly carpeted corridor, past frosted glass doors hinting at quiet, luxurious offices within. The air here was even quieter, scented faintly with expensive perfume or polish. They arrived at a heavy oak door, which the receptionist opened, revealing a spacious, elegantly appointed suite. A distinguished-looking older gentleman with silver hair and kind eyes rose from behind a large mahogany desk. "Miss Sandoval, Jonathan Davies," he said, extending a warm hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please, have a seat. Can I offer you some coffee?" "Water?" Eleanor, feeling slightly overwhelmed, shook his hand and murmured, "Water would be lovely, thank you." As she sat in a comfortable leather armchair, she noticed another person in the room, a stern-looking woman in a sharp business suit standing near the window, observing her intently. Mr. Davies introduced her. "This is Ms. Eleanor Albright, the branch manager here at Sterling City. She's joining us as the bank is facilitating the final transfer of assets." "Miss." Albright offered a curt nod but didn't smile. Mr. Davies cleared his throat, shuffling some papers on his desk. "Eleanor, may I call you Elena? I know this process has taken an exceptionally long time. Your grandfather, Alistair Worthington, built a complex international business empire, and untangling his estate after his passing was challenging. There were legal contests from distant relatives, tax implications across multiple jurisdictions. It's been a marathon." Elena nodded, clutching the small wooden box in her lap. "My mother mentioned things were complicated." "Indeed," Mr. Davies continued, his expression softening. "Your mother, Catherine, was Alistair's only child. They had a difficult relationship after she chose to leave the family sphere to marry your father. Alistair was a proud, stubborn man. But despite their estrangement, he never legally disinherited her, nor you. In fact, he set up a significant blind trust decades ago, naming his direct descendant, you, Eleanor, as the sole beneficiary upon your 30th birthday, or upon the final settlement of his primary estate, whichever came later. The settlement is now complete." Elena frowned, confused. "A trust? I thought maybe there was a small inheritance?" Mr. Davies leaned forward, his gaze serious but kind. "Eleanor, your grandfather was one of the wealthiest men you've never heard of. He valued privacy above all else. The trust he established for you wasn't small. It was designed to protect you, to give you independence, shielded from the Worthington name until you were mature enough and legally entitled to claim it. The total value of the trust, after all taxes and fees, now consolidated and ready for your access, is..." He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. "Just over $187 million. The number hung in the air. 187 million. Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process the figure. It was astronomical, nonsensical. It couldn't be real. She thought of the leaking roof, the $50 loan payment she couldn't get approved, the endless hours at the factory. A strange, light-headed feeling washed over her. "Million?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Elena. Million, Mr. Davies confirmed gently. "It's all yours, managed securely within this trust, waiting for you to claim stewardship." Miss Albright stepped forward, her professional demeanor firmly in place, though her eyes held a spark of something akin to awe. "Ms. Sandoval, Sterling City Bank is honored to manage these assets. We have prepared all the necessary documentation for the account transfer into your name. We just need your signature and the final identification protocol." Mr. Davies indicated the wooden box. "The key your mother entrusted to you. It corresponds to a private security box held here, containing the final identity verification documents your grandfather arranged long ago, bypassing standard methods to ensure absolute certainty and privacy." Feeling numb, Elena opened the box and handed the small, ornate key to Mr. Davies. He and Miss Albright exchanged a look, and the manager left the room briefly, returning with a sleek metallic security box. Mr. Davies inserted Elena's key, along with another key Miss Albright produced. The box clicked open. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, were several documents, a birth certificate with Elena's name and her mother Catherine Worthington's, and a sealed letter addressed to Elena in heavy, old-fashioned handwriting. "Your grandfather's final verification," Mr. Davies explained. Elena picked up the letter, her fingers trembling slightly. She could sign the bank papers later. This felt more important. She carefully broke the seal. The letter was short, written in a surprisingly clear hand. "To my granddaughter, Elena, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the lawyers have finally done their job. I was not a good father to Catherine. Pride is a curse. But she was my daughter, and you are her child, my blood. This money cannot undo the past, but perhaps it can give you a future free from the hardships your mother endured. Use it wisely. Make something good." Don't let wealth poison your spirit as it almost did mine. Alistair Worthington. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, tears not of overwhelming joy at the fortune, but of a complex mix of grief for the family history she never knew, sadness for her mother, and a profound sense of dislocation. Who was she now? Just as she was absorbing the reality of the letter, there was a sharp knock on the suite door. Ms. Albright looked irritated by the interruption. Yes. What is it? The door opened a crack, and a familiar face peered in. Mr. Henderson, the loan officer. He looked flustered. Excuse me, Ms. Albright, terribly sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Davies' office called down about needing signatory verification assistance. They mentioned Ms. Sandoval's name, and I handled her previous query just the other day, so I thought perhaps I could assist. He hadn't fully taken in the scene, his eyes darting between the manager, the lawyer, and the security box, but landing on Eleanor with a look of confusion and dawning realization. He saw her not in her work clothes, but in her neat dress, sitting in the private client suite, surrounded by important people and official-looking documents. His condescending demeanor evaporated, replaced by a sudden sickly pallor. Ms. Albright's eyes narrowed dangerously. Mr. Henderson, your assistance is not required. In fact, your presence is entirely inappropriate. Miss Sandoval is our newest, and might I add, one of our most valued private clients. Mr. Davies stood up, his expression radiating quiet authority. Indeed, Ms. Sandoval was just finalizing the activation of her considerable personal trust fund. Henderson's jaw dropped. He stared at Elena, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror as the pieces clicked into place. The factory worker he had judged and dismissed, the woman he'd lectured about fiscal prudence over a meager $2,000 request, was the heiress they were all fussing over. Miss Sandoval, I had no idea, he stammered, his voice cracking. I apologize if I seemed abrupt the other day. Bank policy, you understand. Heavy workload. Elena looked at him not with anger, but with a profound sense of clarity. The humiliation she'd felt was still a faint echo, but it was overshadowed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. She rose slowly from her chair, the letter from her grandfather still in her hand. She met Mr. Henderson's panicked gaze with a calm, steady look. Yes, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying easily in the suddenly silent room. I understand bank policy, and I also understand judgment. She didn't need to raise her voice or list his offenses. Her composure, her quiet dignity in the face of this staggering reversal of fortune, was condemnation enough. Ms. Albright stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Henderson, I believe your presence is required back in the loan department. Immediately, we will discuss your handling of client interactions later. Henderson practically stumbled backward out of the room, his face ashen. Elena turned back to Mr. Davies and Ms. Albright. Thank you, Mr. Davies, for explaining everything. And Ms. Albright, I believe I am ready to sign those papers now. As she picked up the pen, her hand was perfectly steady. The $187 million wasn't just money. It was vindication, a chance, a responsibility. She wouldn't forget the factory, the leaking roof, or the sting of being judged. She wouldn't become the kind of person her grandfather warned against. She was still Elena Sandoval, the working woman, but now she had the power to make a difference, not just for herself, but for others who were too often overlooked and underestimated. Her future, as her mother had promised, had arrived. And it was far bigger and far more complex than she could ever have imagined. She would fix her roof, yes, but that was just the beginning. This story reminds us that a person's worth is never defined by their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. Judging others based on appearance leads to missed opportunities and reveals more about the judger than the judged. True value lies in character, resilience, and integrity. Qualities often found abundance in the working women who form the backbone of our communities. Never underestimate someone's potential, for hidden depths and unexpected destinies can reside in the most unassuming individuals. The steady rhythm of footsteps on polished floors, the clink of glasses, the polite murmur of conversation. These are the background noises to countless celebrations, often orchestrated by hands that go unnoticed. Behind the seamless service and presented smiles are individuals with their own narratives, their own silent symphonies playing unheard. What happens when the world assumes the uniform defines the person, silencing the melody within? Imagine a working woman, diligently serving those who barely see her, facing ridicule for simply being in their space. Then, imagine a moment where the tables turn, not with anger, but with the unexpected power of a hidden gift. This is Sarah's story, a journey from carrying trays at an exclusive gala to commanding attention with a voice destined for far grander stages. Sarah Jensen adjusted the knot on her borrowed bow tie for the third time, catching her reflection in the greasy chrome of the napkin dispenser at Rosie's retreat. The diner was quiet, caught in the late afternoon lull between the lunch rush and the early dinner crowd. Old Man Henderson nursed his coffee at the counter, engrossed in his crossword puzzle, while the jukebox played a crackly Patsy Cline tune. Sarah sighed, the scent of frying bacon and burnt coffee a familiar comfort she knew she wouldn't find tonight. Tonight was the Starlight Foundation Gala at the Drake Hotel, a world away from chipped Formica tables and bottomless coffee refills. It was a catering gig through Temps to Serve, extra money she desperately needed to fix the perpetually leaky faucet in her Rogers Park apartment, and maybe, just maybe, save up enough for a decent microphone. "You look official," Maria commented, sliding onto the stool beside her, already changed into the identical black pants and white shirt required by Temps to Serve. Maria, pragmatic and sharp-tongued, had been Sarah's anchor both at Rosie's and on these often grueling catering jobs. "Official and slightly terrified," Sarah admitted, smoothing down the stiff fabric of her white shirt. "It's the Drake, Maria. Chandeliers and probably caviar. Feels like I need a passport, not just a serving tray." Maria snorted. "Just remember they put their ridiculously expensive pants on one leg at a time, same as us. Don't let the diamonds blind you. Focus on the tips. That's the real prize tonight." Sarah nodded, though her anxiety wasn't just about navigating fancy hors d'oeuvres. These gigs always intensified her feeling of being an outsider, someone looking through the glass at a life she couldn't touch. It was a feeling she poured into her music, the melodies scribbled onto order pads during slow moments, the lyrics hammered out late at night on her battered acoustic guitar, its resonance filling the small space above the noisy street. Music was her secret language, her true self hidden beneath the waitress uniform and the polite professional smile. She'd written a new verse last night for a song she called Concrete Lullaby, trying to capture the strange beauty of city lights, reflecting on wet pavement after a storm. A melody kept playing in her head, a hopeful counterpoint to the melancholic lyrics. She just needed to remember to keep it in her head tonight. No humming, blending in was key. Blend in, make money, go home. That was the plan. Hours later, the plan felt increasingly difficult to execute. The Drake Hotel's Gold Coast ballroom wasn't just fancy, it was breathtakingly opulent. Crystal chandeliers, vast enough to shelter small birds, cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of guests, dressed in shimmering gowns and impeccably tailored tuxedos. The air buzzed with polite laughter, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the smooth, unobtrusive sounds of a live jazz trio tucked into a corner. Ice sculptures carved into impossible shapes dripped steadily onto linen-draped tables, groaning under the weight of delicate pastries and gleaming silver chafing dishes. Sarah balanced her heavy tray, the thin stems of the champagne flutes rattling precariously as she navigated the sea of expensive fabrics and clouds of pricey perfume. She focused on keeping her movements smooth, her expression neutral, her eyes downcast unless offering a drink. Be invisible. Blend in. She repeated the mantra silently. Yet she couldn't help but feel the stark contrast between this glittering world and her own reality. The pre-dawn alarm for the early shift at Rosie's, the crowded bus ride, the constant calculations of bills versus tips. As she offered a glass to a woman whose diamond necklace probably cost more than Sarah earned in 5 years, she felt a familiar pang, not of envy, but of dislocation. It fueled the melody in her head, the counterpoint becoming more insistent. Without thinking, lost for a second in the internal rhythm, she hummed a few bars under her breath, a low, almost subconscious sound. It was barely audible above the general din, but it happened just as she passed a cluster of younger guests gathered near a towering floral arrangement. A young man, impeccably dressed with aggressively styled hair and a watch that gleamed under the chandeliers, stopped mid-sentence. "What on earth was that noise?" he asked, his voice carrying petulance. He scanned the immediate area, his gaze sliding right past Sarah initially, as if she were part of the furniture. His companion, a woman poured into a tight silver sequined dress, let out a high-pitched artificial laugh. "Oh, Preston, don't be silly. I think it was the help." Her eyes landed on Sarah, sharp and dismissive, taking in the black and white uniform with undisguised contempt. "Probably humming some dreadful little tune they heard on the bus. Can't they just serve the drinks quietly and try not to intrude?" Preston Vance III. Sarah caught the name as he introduced himself loudly to a newcomer moments later, smirked, clearly enjoying his friend's cattiness. He finally acknowledged Sarah, but only to reinforce the insult. "Yes, quite. This isn't some roadside dive bar, you know." He waved a dismissive hand. "Some people simply lack the breeding to understand ambiance or appropriate decorum." He plucked a champagne flute from Sarah's tray without a word of thanks, his fingers brushing hers carelessly before turning back to his friends, instantly resuming his self-important monologue. "As I was saying about Father's acquisition," Sarah stood frozen for a split second, the weight of the tray suddenly immense. Heat flooded her face, a burning tide of shame and anger. Dreadful little tune. Roadside dive bar. The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. She wanted to retort, to say my music matters, to wipe the smug look off his face. But the ironclad rules of Temps to Serve flashed in her mind. Maintain professionalism. Do not engage. The client is always right. Swallowing the bitter words, she forced her features into a mask of polite neutrality. "Excuse me," she managed, her voice tight and barely audible, before turning and moving swiftly away, the champagne flutes rattling like tiny, mocking bells. She saw Maria across the room, catching her eye. Maria raised a questioning eyebrow, then her expression hardened with understanding as she likely guessed what had happened. A silent promise of commiseration passed between them. Later, the jazz trio took a break, leaving a relative quiet in their corner. Sarah moved methodically, clearing dinner plates laden with the remains of foie gras and artfully arranged microgreens. Her duties inevitably led her back towards the vicinity of Preston Vance III and his circle. He was louder now, fueled by several glasses of champagne, holding court about his alleged influence in the music industry. "Honestly, Brittany," he declared, gesturing expansively with his brandy snifter, "the business is saturated with mediocrity. These reality show contestants, these internet sensations, fleeting flashes in the pan. True artistry, refined talent, requires cultivation. It requires exposure to culture, the right connections, the right environment." He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping the room before deliberately landing on Sarah as she reached for an empty bread plate at his table. "You certainly don't discover the next big thing carrying trays at a charity function, believe me." Brittany, the woman in sequins, tittered appreciatively. "So true, Press. It's like innate, isn't it? You either have it or you don't. What would someone like her—" She flicked her eyes towards Sarah again. "Possibly understand about complex harmonies or vocal dynamics or stage presence?" The words hit Sarah like physical blows. It wasn't just about her job now. It was a direct assault on her passion, her secret self, the music that was inextricably part of her soul. She felt a tremor run through her hands as she carefully stacked the plates, her vision blurring slightly. Just keep working. Don't react. Don't give them the satisfaction. But inside, a storm was brewing. The humiliation curdled into a cold knot in her stomach. Maybe they were right. Maybe her dreams were absurd, destined to remain scribbled notes and whispered melodies in a tiny apartment, unheard by anyone who mattered. She finished clearing the table, her movements stiff, robotic. She retreated towards the relative anonymity of the service station near the kitchen entrance, desperately needing a moment to compose herself. Maria found her there, leaning against the wall, eyes closed. "Hey," Maria said softly, touching her arm. "I saw those grade A jerks giving you a hard time earlier. What did they say now?" Sarah recounted the conversation, her voice low and trembling with suppressed anger. Maria listened, her expression growing thunderous. "Unbelievable," she hissed. "The arrogance! Don't you let them get to you, Sarah. They're insecure little snobs hiding behind Daddy's money. They wouldn't recognize real talent if it served them champagne, which apparently it just did." Maria's fierce loyalty was a balm, but the sting of the insults lingered. Sarah spent the next hour moving through the motions, her earlier enthusiasm completely gone, replaced by a dull ache of spirit. She avoided Preston's group, focusing solely on the tasks at hand, refilling water glasses, offering coffee, clearing dessert plates piled with the remnants of elaborate chocolate creations. Keep busy, make it end. The gala was winding down. The main speeches were concluded, substantial donations had been pledged to the Starlight Foundation, and guests were enjoying final drinks and conversation before the anticipated closing performance by Lila Sky, a critically acclaimed indie singer-songwriter whose star was rapidly ascending. Suddenly, a ripple of agitation spread from the stage area. Hushed, urgent conversations, frantic gestures, someone speaking urgently into a headset. The relaxed atmosphere tightened with confusion. Ms. Dubois, the event organizer Sarah had checked in with earlier, appeared near the stage, her face pale, her professional composure visibly cracking. She hurried to the microphone, tapping it nervously, creating a feedback squeal that made several guests wince. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ms. Dubois began, her voice strained. "Your attention, please. We seem to be experiencing a slight, unforeseen technical difficulty with some essential equipment." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Furthermore, I've just received word that our scheduled performer, the wonderful Lila Sky, has unfortunately been significantly delayed due to unexpected flight cancellations out of Denver. Her arrival is uncertain." A collective groan and disappointed murmurs swept through the ballroom. The energy, carefully curated throughout the evening, began to dissipate rapidly. The jazz trio had already packed their instruments and departed. The stage, brightly lit and expectant, now felt awkwardly empty. Miss Dubois wrung her hands, her eyes darting around the room with desperation. "This is highly irregular, I know, but perhaps, while we try to resolve the situation, does anyone—" Her voice faltered. "Perhaps someone among our talented guests feels inclined to offer a brief musical interlude, just to fill the gap." She looked hopefully towards the tables of CEOs, surgeons, and society doyens. The suggestion was met with awkward silence, broken only by Preston Vance III's loud, contemptuous scoff near the back. "As if," he declared to Brittany, clearly audible in the hush. "Who here would possibly lower themselves to perform impromptu like some street busker?" Brittany giggled sycophantically. It was that sound, that final, careless dismissal, that flicked a switch inside Sarah. She was standing near the service station with Maria, preparing to start clearing the coffee cups. Maria, who had also heard Preston's comment, turned to Sarah, her eyes flashing with sudden, fierce inspiration. "Do it, Sarah," she whispered urgently, grabbing Sarah's arm. Sarah stared at her, uncomprehending. "Do what?" "Sing. Go up there, right now, show them. Show him what real talent sounds like." Maria gestured towards the stage, then subtly indicated Preston's mocking face. "Maria, are you crazy?" Sarah hissed back, horrified. "I can't, look at me, I'm working, I'm wearing this stupid uniform. They'll laugh me out of the room." "Let them laugh. Who cares what they think?" Maria insisted, her grip tightening. "Ms. Dubois just asked for someone, anyone. There's a guitar right there." The bassist left his acoustic leaning against the amp. "What have you got to lose now, Sarah? Your dignity? Those pigs already tried to take that. Go take it back." His words struck a chord deep within Sarah. What did she have to lose? Her job? Temps to serve gigs were easy come, easy go. Her pride? It was already wounded, trampled on by careless words and condescending sneers. She looked at the empty stage, then at the smirking faces of Preston and Brittany, embodying the casual cruelty she'd swallowed all night. A wave of pure, unadulterated defiance surged through her, washing away the fear, the hesitation, the years of keeping her voice hidden. Enough. Before the impulse could fade, before rational thought could reassert itself, she was moving, pulling away from Maria, walking with quick, determined steps towards the stage. Heads turned. Guests exchanged puzzled glances. A caterer, approaching the stage. Ms. Dubois looked utterly flabbergasted, starting to step forward as if to intercept her. But Sarah didn't slow down. She ignored the confused stares, the whispers rippling through the crowd. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a frantic drum solo, but her feet felt strangely steady, purposeful. She reached the stage steps and ascended. The acoustic guitar rested against a large black amplifier, just as Maria had said. Sarah picked it up. The smooth wood felt familiar, grounding, an extension of herself. Her fingers automatically found the strings, checking the tuning with practiced efficiency. Someone in the crowd let out an audible snicker. Then, Preston's mocking voice cut through the tense silence. "Lost your way to the kitchen, sweetheart? Or perhaps you're here to polish the microphone stand?" Sarah didn't turn. She didn't acknowledge him. She walked to the center stage microphone, her worn, sensible work shoes silent on the polished surface. She adjusted the height slightly. The ballroom had fallen completely silent now. Every eye was on her, the waitress in the ill-fitting uniform holding a guitar on the stage, meant for a star. Curiosity, confusion, pity, and amusement flickered across the faces below. She took a deep, centering breath, the kind she took before starting her shift at Rosie's. "Hello," she said. Her voice, amplified, filled the vast room, sounding both strange and familiar. It trembled slightly but held firm. "My name is Sarah Jensen. I work for the catering company, Temps to Serve." She saw Preston nudge Brittany, both wearing identical expressions of incredulous amusement. Their smiles widened. This was going to be hilarious. "I wrote a song," Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence as she focused on the task, shutting out the judgmental faces. "It's called Concrete Lullaby." Then she closed her eyes for a brief second, took one more breath and began to play. The opening chords filled the expectant hush, simple, evocative, carrying a weight of melancholy tinged with resilience. And then she sang, "City sleeps beneath a bruised sky grey, sirens sing in sorrows of the day, streetlights paint in puddles orange bright, another lonely Saturday night." Her voice, it wasn't thin or uncertain. It wasn't the humming whisper Preston had mocked. It poured out of her, rich, resonant, infused with a raw, soulful power that stunned the room into absolute stillness. It held the grit of the city, the ache of unspoken dreams, the quiet dignity of overlooked lives. It was utterly authentic, heartbreakingly beautiful and completely unexpected. The smirks vanished from Preston's and Brittany's faces, replaced by slack-jawed disbelief. They stared, mouths slightly agape, as the waitress they'd ridiculed transformed before their eyes into something else entirely, something undeniable. "Got my dreams packed in a worn-out shoe, waiting for a bus on Division Avenue, radio plays static, soft and low, got nowhere special left to go." Sarah opened her eyes, losing herself in the music, the story unfolding through the lyrics. She sang about the flickering neon signs, the smell of rain on asphalt, the faces glimpsed through grimy windows, images drawn directly from her life, her observations from behind the counter at Rosie's, her late-night journeys home. It was a world away from the glittering ballroom, yet the raw emotion resonated, transcending the setting. She poured all the frustration, the humiliation, the hope, and the weariness of the evening, of her life, into every note. Hear the concrete lullaby tonight. Echoes in the alleys out of sight, holding on to whispers of the light, praying that tomorrow feels all right. She saw people leaning forward, captivated. She saw Ms. Dubois standing frozen by the stage steps, hand covering her mouth. She saw the jazz trio musicians who had apparently lingered near the exit, watching with professional astonishment. And near the back by a marble pillar, She saw a man she vaguely recognized from photos. Arthur Sterling, the semi-reclusive founder of Nova Records, a legend in the music industry. He wasn't mingling. He was watching her, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. Maybe tomorrow sun will break on through, find a different song for me and you. Yeah, a different song for me and you. She sang the final line, letting the last chord hang in the air, echoing in the profound silence. For a beat, nothing happened. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Then someone started clapping, then another, and another. Within seconds, the room erupted in thunderous applause, genuine and overwhelming, washing over her in waves. It wasn't just polite appreciation, it was an ovation. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling. The sound was deafening, exhilarating. Sarah stood bathed in the stage lights, the guitar still pressed against her, tears finally streaming down her face, tears of release, vindication, sheer disbelief. Before the applause even showed signs of fading, Arthur Sterling was moving through the crowd with quiet determination. He navigated around stunned guests, his eyes fixed on the stage. He bypassed Preston and Brittany, who looked utterly deflated and were trying to shrink into the background without giving them a second glance. He reached the steps just as Sarah, dazed and overwhelmed, was starting to lower the guitar. "Miss Jensen," Arthur Sterling said, his voice calm but carrying easily over the subsiding applause. Sarah looked up, startled, recognizing him properly now. "Arthur Sterling, Nova Records." He offered a slight respectful nod. That performance was, quite simply, extraordinary. Concrete lullaby, you called it. Is that your own composition? Sarah, speechless, could only nod, wiping awkwardly at her tears. Your voice, Sterling continued, his gaze sharp, analytical, yet appreciative, possesses a truth, a raw power that is exceptionally rare. It's the kind of authenticity I spend years searching for. Where, may I ask, have you been hiding that talent? Sarah found her voice, though it came out as a shaky whisper, colored with unintentional irony. Serving champagne, mostly. And coffee. Sterling allowed himself a brief, genuine smile. Well, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket, I have a strong suspicion those days might be nearing their end. My office, Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp. We have a great deal to discuss. He pressed a simple, elegant business card into her trembling hand. Just then, Ms. Dubois rushed forward, effusive and apologetic. Sarah, my dear girl, that was absolutely magnificent. We had no idea. Forgive me, Mr. Sterling, we were just so surprised. Preston and Brittany were attempting a discreet exit, but several nearby guests shot them withering looks, their earlier mockery now painfully exposed. One older woman muttered quite audibly, Some people wouldn't know talent if it hit them over the head with a silver tray. Sarah caught Preston's eye one last time across the crowded room. He looked away quickly, his face flushed crimson. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He held no sway over her world now. She politely excused herself from Ms. Dubois and Mr. Sterling, promising to call his office first thing. She handed the borrowed guitar back to one of the stagehands, her fingers tingling. Then she walked off the stage, head held high, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments that now followed her with newfound respect. She found Maria near the service exit, beaming, tears in her own eyes. Maria threw her arms around Sarah in a fierce, triumphant hug. I knew it, Maria yelled gleefully, laughing and crying at the same time. I told you they were idiots. Oh my God, Sarah, Arthur Sterling. Sarah clutched the heavy cardstock of the business card in her hand. It felt like a key. She still had half an hour left on her shift, coffee cups to clear, linens to fold. But as she moved back into the rhythm of her work, the familiar black and white uniform felt different. It was just fabric, a temporary costume. Inside, her own music, her real voice, was finally playing loud and clear, resonating far beyond the gilded walls of the ballroom, ready to find its stage in the wider world. The concrete lullaby was ending. A new song was about to begin. A uniform defines a job, not the person wearing it. True talent and worth often lie hidden beneath surfaces. Society is quick to judge. This story highlights the folly of underestimating someone based on their profession or appearance. The most powerful voices can emerge from unexpected places, reminding us that dignity, creativity, and dreams are not exclusive to privilege. Look beyond the surface, listen closely, and you might just discover something extraordinary.
Have you ever walked past someone working a seemingly humble job, collecting cans, cleaning floors, serving coffee, and made an instant assumption about their life, their intelligence, their worth? We live in a world quick to judge by the crispness of a suit or the logo on a laptop bag, often overlooking the dignity and strength